Okay, colleagues, welcome back. Long time no see, right? So, what I want to do today is actually to try and finally wrap up our discussion of the sophists. Don't worry too much, though. We'll keep coming back to their ideas and to their notions. The sophists will never be very far. So, before we, so to speak, jump right into it, a word about organization. So, in this online course, I'm trying to strike a balance. Basically, I want to do some justice to the thinkers that we are discussing, but at the same time, I cannot really go into too many detail, or basically the course will take forever to finish. And so my basic solution is the following. First of all, I hope that listeners will take this course as an invitation to study these thinkers, the ones perhaps that seemed interesting or caught their attention. So to study these thinkers on their own in more detail. And on the other hand, definitely sometime in the future, I do plan to make a second pass and talk about some of the thinkers of special interest and importance to me at greater length. One example so far would be Heraclitus. So with that strategy in mind, basically what I want to do is to more or less skip through the rest of the sophists. Just give you maybe a couple of lines or a couple of ideas from each. And then, as I said, leave it to you to do the in-depth research. And also, as I said, hopefully, to return to these philosophers at greater length in the future. So, with that said, here goes. The first on our list is Gorgias of Leontini, the famous and illustrious teacher of rhetoric. So, in no particular order, let me touch upon some of the topics related to Gorgias. Possibly the chief among them is Gorgias's portrayal of rhetoric. Gorgias, in the dialogue bearing his name, boasts to Socrates that if a skilled rhetorician were to compete against an expert in a particular field in trying to persuade the crowd of people, let's say a political assembly, of what is the right course of action, the skilled rhetorician will win every time. Such is the power of persuasion. So to give a particular example, a rhetorician would speak more persuasively on the topic of medicine than a doctor. So again, a rhetorician would be able to persuade without really having the requisite knowledge, without necessarily even knowing whether his prescription is correct one or not. Again, a deeply challenging, a deeply troubling view, especially problematic for democratic political theory, this danger of demagogues, of politicians hiring professional speechwriters or psychologists to manipulate the public opinion. Indeed, a very dangerous prospect. But let me just parenthetically ask, is there some truth to the Gorgias' assertion? And if yes, should we blame Gorgias? Should we censor his works? Or should we raise an alarm? Should we maybe read Gorgias and try to understand what to do with that, how to deal with this issue? I guess ideally I should try to keep my opinions out of the way, but let me allow myself this digression. A thinker whom we'll talk about in due course, John Stuart Mill. I think Mill would urge us to take this possibility of persuasion very seriously. And Mill's response, of a vaguely Protagorean kind, is that indeed there is no surefire way to know what is the truth. There is no surefire way to tell who is the true doctor and who is just pretending to be one. So again, Mill's solution, I think vaguely reminiscent of Protagoras, would be to allow the greatest possible extent of the freedom of speech, and to hope that in the competition of ideas, and also, I guess, in the competition of philosophers and thinkers of all stripes who produce these ideas, without any constraint, without censorship, the idea that will be left standing at the end of the day will hopefully bring us closer to the truth. And for Mill, there is no other way to facilitate human intellectual progress except by allowing the greatest possible extent of free speech and therefore the greatest possible extent of competition between ideas. Though parenthetically, let me note that Mill is quite cognizant of the fact that this kind of free speech is possible only against the background of actually very highly developed institutions of social, political, and I guess economic life as well. What Mill calls advanced stages of civilization. Couple more ideas from Gorgias. Again, demonstrating the power of persuasion, Gorgias seems to have written a defense speech on behalf of the Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships, talking about the Trojan War, obviously. I've seen in one of the commentaries an interesting idea that far from being relativistic or opportunistic, when Gorgias actually tries to defend Helen, he is in fact merely advancing the proper study, the proper understanding of jurisprudence. This idea that in a court of law, especially in modern times, we operate with a presumption of innocence, and we want the defendant to produce the best speech on behalf of the accused party. And also this idea that there may be attenuating circumstances, that, let's say, if a person kills another man inadvertently, or maybe in an altered state of mind, we should regard this case differently. We should assign less guilt than in the case of a cold-blooded, premeditated murder. And I guess the final idea from Gorgias that I want to touch upon is this famous dictum that nothing exists, but if something were to exist, it could not be known. But if it were to be knowable, there would still be no way to communicate it. So again, nothing exists. Even if it does, it cannot be known. Even if it can be known, it cannot be communicated. This famous dictum opens up such a can of worms. Now, obviously, we are talking about the limitations of the human intellect and potentially the limitations of human language. Again, topics that would be very fruitfully developed in the later philosophical tradition. So let me just leave you with this formula. I think the proper place to return back to it would be when we finally get to the ancient skeptics, and especially the greatest of the ancient skeptics, Dr. Sextus Empiricus. And again, apologies for this kind of a bit of a smorgasbord presentation. But in the interest of saving time, let us push forward.